Good evening, everyone. My name is Barry Lewis, and I'm the executive editor of the Times-Herald-Record. I want to welcome everyone to this special political debate sponsored by the Times-Herald-Record and the Orange County Citizens Foundation. I want to welcome and thank our candidates who are running for the 19th Congressional District seat, Republican Congressman John Faso and Democrat Antonio Delgado, for agreeing to participate. Also to those here in attendance at SUNY Sullivan, as well as our viewers who are watching the debate while it is streaming live. I also want to remind viewers that they can also watch this debate anytime at recordonline.com. I want to remind everyone of a debate we have coming up tomorrow night at the Great Room in the Kaplan Center on the campus of SUNY Orange in Newburgh, and that's for the New York 18th Congressional District seat between Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney and James O'Donnell. To remind our viewers, the 19th Congressional District includes all of Sullivan and Ulster counties. Our panel who will be asking questions today, besides myself, includes Times-Herald-Record opinion page contributor Ken Hall, as well as questions contributed from the Orange County Citizens Foundation. Our goal for the debate is to hopefully provide voters with the best possible understanding of where the two candidates stand on the issues. For that reason, not only will our panelists be asking questions, but we will also allow the candidates to exchange ideas as they see fit. As the moderator, I will keep the time to make sure the debate keeps moving and that we have some balance in the exchange. Both candidates will have 2 minutes to give an opening statement, after which we will alternate asking questions, giving each candidate 2 minutes to answer, and the other candidate will have a minute to rebut. We have a timekeeper, and I will alert the candidate if he has exceeded his time and move on to the next question. Before the debate, we flipped a coin as to who would go first with the opening and closing statements. Congressman Faso won the debate, and he will go first with the opening statement. Congressman Faso.
Well, thank you, Barry, and thank you to SUNY Sullivan for hosting this debate tonight. Thank you to my opponent, Mr. Delgado. I think this is the 5th or 6th opportunity we've had to appear jointly together, and I think these are very good. And most of all, thank you to our attendees here tonight from Sullivan County, and thank you to those who are watching in Facebook land. I'm running on my record. I'm pleased to say that I rank 18th out of 435 members of Congress, being most bipartisan. That is in the top 5% of members of the House. I think in these polarized times, it's extraordinarily important that members work across the aisle to get things done. I'm proud that just last week, President Trump signed into law a major opioid abuse legislation that I had a major role in. I was invited to the signing ceremony at the White House. The major role I had was the STOP Act legislation, which I authored with 275 co-sponsors, that was enacted into law, and it will shut down the flow of illegal substances like fentanyl and carfentanil from China to the United States through the United States Postal Service. I also was a leader in an effort to pass a right-to-try law in the Congress, which is now law, that allows a terminally ill patient to try a drug which is not fully through the FDA approval process with the permission and consent of their physician to try a drug that might be a life-saving treatment for them. We also passed major legislation dealing with mental health, and we also passed major legislation affecting our veterans. In fact, I'm glad to see Charlie Briner, my friend from Sullivan County here tonight, a veteran who has been stalwart on veterans issues. We've done many things on a bipartisan basis. Yes, this is a polarized time in America, but I look forward, if I have the opportunity to serve the people again of the 19th District, to work hard to diffuse those tensions and to get things done for our country and our district. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Delgado.
Yes, good evening, Barry. Good evening to all of you. Thank you for attending. Congressman, good to see you again as well. I'm running for Congress because for a very long time now, working families, working class families, like the one that I grew up in upstate in Schenectady, have been left behind by a political system that is trending towards outside special interests, dark moneyed interests at the expense of these working families. When I was growing up in upstate, we were #1 in the world in upward mobility, and by we I mean America. And now we are dead last in the Western world. For the past 40-some-odd years, the economy has doubled in size. Productivity has increased. Nevertheless, wages have remained stagnant over that same period of time. 80% of folks right now are sharing just 10% of the wealth. Two-thirds of folks right now are living paycheck to paycheck. And in the midst of all of this inequality and pain, we get individuals that vote to take health care away from people for a tax break to a wealthy few. We passed a tax bill that adds $1.5 trillion to our deficit, bankrupts our ability to invest in infrastructure, education, renewable energy, and also parallels or makes perilous programs that so many folks rely on, from Medicaid to Medicare, Social Security. Now, I submit to you that part of the reason why we found ourselves in this position is because for a very long time, we keep having politicians who've made a career out of partisanship and divisiveness, who are backed by outside money and special interests and corporate PAC money. And they are no longer beholden to the will of the people. The only way we can change this, in my opinion, is to really elect independent actors, folks who are only beholden to the people, folks who do come from the margins, who understand the value of opportunity, who understand the value of a public school education, and will fight for the people. I have not taken corporate PAC money. I do come from working class roots, and I had a set of diverse experiences grounded in our shared values: integrity, accountability, character, honesty, decency, respect, compassion, and love. These are the things that I think we need right now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delgado. And once again, as we begin the debate, where I would ask that each and every one please hold their applause and let the candidates have a chance to speak. Mr. Hall.
First question, in the light of the killings at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh over the weekend, what can and should Congress do to help prevent further gun violence? Congressman.
Well, the killings over the weekend in Pittsburgh at the synagogue were a horrific reminder that anti-Semitism is alive and well. What caused the twisted and deranged person to commit this horrific crime is something that we should find out about, and certainly is something that all of us as Americans want to know. We all extend our sympathy and thoughts to the people whose lives were lost and their families. Just incidentally, last January, we passed legislation in the House. It was a Democratic bill sponsored by Benny Thompson from Mississippi. There were 15 co-sponsors of that bill. I was the sole Republican co-sponsor of the bill. It passed the House, and this bill would set up a grant program for us to help harden the environment and harden the buildings for nonprofit organizations, including religious organizations. It is something that I feel very strongly about. Last year as well in Ulster County, I hosted a forum with the FBI and local law enforcement, with members of the church community and religious leaders throughout Ulster County, including churches and synagogues, to talk about how we can best protect soft targets such as houses of worship. So I think that's extraordinarily important that we undertake these activities. I'm hopeful that the legislation that I co-sponsored, will actually pass the Senate in the lame duck session, because I don't think we can delay any longer. There are certainly people that have twisted minds, perhaps encouraged by social media. And let's face it, anti-Semitism is the oldest and most pernicious and most vile prejudice that exists among mankind. And it's something that I hope we can eradicate, but unfortunately we're going to have to work very hard to protect ourselves, work with law enforcement and houses of worship and other nonprofits to make sure we can better protect ourselves and our communities.
Mr. Delgado?
Yes, obviously the events were tragic and heart-wrenching. And, you know, yesterday evening I went to the interfaith vigil at Landfield Avenue in Monticello, and you know, mourn the loss, tragic loss of so many lives. The hate and divisiveness in this country right now is at a fever pitch, and it is imperative that we lean into our shared values, into love. But to answer the question, and the question was ultimately about how we deal with the problem of gun violence, and it's important we answer the actual question. I think we have to rally around areas that we know we have real consensus. You know, 90% of folks in this country want universal background checks. 73% of folks want, the NRA want universal background checks. Up to 80% want safe storage laws. 97% want to ban the bump stock. More than half the country wants to keep military weapons of war off our streets, not of our churches, not of our synagogues. There are a host of issues that we can rally around as a community, and yet we still have a gun lobby, gun manufacturing lobby that has essentially taken over the NRA and prevented any real progress on this issue. And it is important that we get individuals in Congress who won't take money from the NRA and stand up for protecting communities from gun violence. It is an epidemic. When we have 8 kids a day dying from gun violence, when we have 17 to 18 being hospitalized, when women are 5 times more likely to die in a domestic violence dispute, it is a problem. And it is important that we actually rally in a common sense, bipartisan way to get something done. When we have young people walking out of school, that tells you how bad it is. People are looking for answers, and we as leaders have to step up and stop politicizing this issue and get something done. And I think if we can elect folks who are not beholden to outside interests or special interest groups like the NRA, we certainly can get something done.
Mr. Delgado, would you support any kind of ban or restriction on assault weapons?
Yes.
Anything in particular?
Well, I think we have to go back and revisit the assault weapons ban and see what we can do with that. I mean, it's clear to got to understand that there are different types of AR-15s, some that fall within the category of a true assault weapon. You know, the AR-15 Colt, for example, is not technically an assault weapon. So we can be thoughtful about how we define the term, but we do know that mass shootings were on the decline and went up considerably once the assault weapons ban was allowed to sunset. So we certainly should revisit that, absolutely.
Congressman?
Well, I think actually the assault weapons ban that had been enacted during the 90s had expired, and it had shown, the proof had shown that it had not been particularly effective at Columbine happened during this assault weapon ban, for instance. So the fact is what we've got to do is better understand what motivates people to become deranged, to act out in these evil and pernicious ways. Mental health is a big issue. But this individual in Pittsburgh, for instance, apparently he had legal possession of these firearms. I'm not sure how a background check system, for instance, would have done anything there. I think it's important before we jump to conclusions about this particular instance that we know all the facts, and indeed we do not know all the facts now. I support the ban on bump stocks, which is about to become a regulation of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Administration, and it's important we also tighten the background check system when a dishonorably discharged Air Force veteran had committed a crime, and that had not been disclosed to the background check system. So we did close that loophole this past year.
Mr. Delgado, much has been made of the decade-old rap lyrics from the album you made. Your opponent calls the lyrics ugly, offensive, and paints a false picture of America. An ad released by the National Republican Campaign Committee went much further in its criticism. Some of the lyrics I can't print in my newspaper, nor would I say them here. Others refer to drug use, sex, and criticize dead presidents as white supremacists. You have said you don't apologize for the lyrics and that they have been taken out of context, and that the ads are race baiting. Can you explain what you meant then and if you believe those lyrics to be true today?
So it's important to understand the nature of this line of attack. It is divisive. And it is grotesquely misleading, as objective indicators have made clear. You don't got to take my word from it. You can look at the 18 clergy members who stepped up and submitted a letter on their own accord to say this was disgusting and misleading. You can look at the fact that Woodstock Radio pulled the ads and stopped playing them on their radio program because you're so grotesquely misleading. You can look at the fact that Dr. Benjamin over at SUNY New Paltz both publicly and personally apologized for his involvement in the situation. You can look at local and national publications like the Washington Post who called the ads grossly misleading. You can also look at the former Congressman, Chris Gibson, who said he regrets the tone of the ads. On every occasion, we're seeing individuals separate and apart from me making it plain that this line of attack is baseless and groundless. And as I've said repeatedly, the themes that I spoke about when I was doing music were uplifting themes about making sure that folks who feel oppressed and marginalized are included in the system. I talked about income inequality. I talked about climate change. You know, the Washington Post looked at my lyrics and called them wonky. wonky, just to put it in perspective. So the point I'm trying to make is you don't graduate from law school, from Harvard Law School, decide to go and wade into hip-hop unless you have a real purpose. And the purpose in doing that was to empower young people with real information and knowledge. I rapped about the Iraq War. I rapped about Katrina. I rapped about things that people to this day feel like are relevant. And that is a system that is no longer responding to working families and everyday Americans all across this country. And yes, I'm very proud of that work. And when you take lyrics with any art form, and you divorce them from their context, you lend them to being able to feed into bias and stereotypes. That is the nature of the attack, and it is unfair, it is wrong, and ultimately, I hope that the congressman would denounce the ads.
So would it be fair to say that what you said then, for the most part, in talking about these themes, you would believe and hold true today?
As I said, the themes that I spoke about, as they pertain to income inequality, as they pertain to wealth disparity, as they pertain to climate change and its impact on our society, as it pertains to a broken system that is too co-opted by moneyed interests. These are all the things that I spoke about in my music, and certainly stand by those themes.
Congressman?
Well, obviously, as you know, those were not my ads. What I've said is that the words, that the language in the ad is provocative. The ad is provocative, and the language that Mr. Delgado authored is often provocative. And the fact is that words do matter. And the political views he represented, frankly, I think represent many of the political views he holds today. And as you're right, Barry, you would not print many of the things and the phrases that he authored. But look at the fact is that he just parachuted into the district, having never lived or worked in this district. He moved into Dutchess County in April or March of 2017. He registered to vote, and the next day signed up to run for Congress, having never worked a day or lived a day in this district in his adult life. And the fact is that many people will look at, well, what is his record here? He has no record here, but he does have a CD. And many people will look at those words that he authored in the CD. And as you said, Barry, you would not print many of those phrases and words in your newspaper. And I will not repeat them here.
May I rebut?
Go ahead.
Thank you. The congressman has consistently brought up the fact that I'm somehow an outsider, not from here, just came back home randomly. Note the word home, right? Let's be clear. Born and raised in Schenectady. I don't hold it against the congressman that he's from Long Island, but he is, okay? I was raised in upstate. My wife was raised in upstate, grew up an hour apart from me in Woodstock. Now, the congressman talks a lot about the quote-unquote brain drain and how young people have to move away to pursue opportunities. We graduated from high school and pursued opportunities. At about that same time, the congressman came into the picture. Around 1987 or so, he became a state assemblyman. Let's analyze his record over these past 30 years. What has he done to address the so-called brain drain? Here's what I know he's done. He's voted 21 times no, equal pay for equal work, called Roe v. Wade a black mark on the country, lobbied for oil pipelines, got dinged for pay-to-play violations, got banned for 5 years for Ponzi schemes, ran for governor, lost, ran for comptroller, lost, then got backed by the Mercer family, and then voted to gut health care, and then voted for a tax bill on the backs of working middle-class Americans. To me, we need to come back to clean up the mess that he created.
Okay. Folks, occupancy was going to be one of my questions. Since we morphed to that more quickly, Congressman, why don't you rebut and answer that one, and then we can get back to what was the original question. Folks?
Well, it is very clear that Mr. Delgado has a skewed and warped view of history. The fact is, I did move here. I grew up on Long Island. I wanted to be born upstate, but my mother insisted I be with her on Long Island. And the fact is that I ran for office 3.5 years after I was living and working in this in my assembly district back then. Mr. Delgado moved in bought a house, registered to vote, and the very next day started to run for Congress. He doesn't have any record here, and that may not matter to some of his supporters, but I think it does matter to most people. And, you know, to repeat this sad, tired litany of false charges is really beneath him. You know, he's so anxious and so arrogant and presumptuous to believe that he should be elected to Congress that he apparently will just say just about anything in order to get elected. And that is a sad commentary on someone who just arrived here, who has no record here, and issues baseless attacks that had been thoroughly aired and rebutted previously. And it's a shame.
Okay. Next question.
My supporters can hold their applause, and we can wait till the end, and maybe the other side would do the same thing.
All right, next question.
Congressman, continuing on this theme, the New York Times called your campaign race baiting, and the Washington Post said it is a test of whether bigotry is enough to win. How do you respond to those critics?
Well, it's absurd. And if I were ever endorsed by the New York Times, then I would really worry about myself. The fact of the matter is that the gentleman has no record here. Now, he doesn't want to, he never defends calling women, for instance, trick-ass hoes. Now, if I had said that, you would rightfully question my validity and my suitability for office. But the gentleman thinks he can say anything, and he can hide behind this allegation that others make of racism. Well, it's not going to wash. Just last week at our debate, he said he was against moving the embassy of the United States in Israel to Jerusalem. And he said also that Israel is not a Jewish democracy. Well, you know, words do matter. And I roundly condemned his expression. Israel is a democracy. It is a Jewish state. And the fact is that the gentleman has very muddled views on this issue and many others, and his words matter. And then the day later, he tried to retract his words. But the fact was, back in February at a Democratic forum, he said virtually the same thing, that Israel is not a Jewish democracy, and that he had this kind of off-kilter reference to settlements, etc. The fact is that Israel is our main ally in the Middle East, and we should be supportive of the state of Israel and not falling into the trap of many of the opponents of the state of Israel. So the words do matter. The gentleman said at a debate that he wanted to have a single-payer health care system, that his Medicare for All system approach would be a step towards that. Today he tries to hide behind the notion, oh, he only wants to get a Medicare buy-in for people. What his plan would do is destroy the private health care system. It would eliminate employer-provided health care. It would destroy Medicare as we know it. It would double income taxes and cost the taxpayers and the country $32 trillion over 10 years. So, Mr. Delgado, words do matter, and your words today don't add up.
Mr. Delgado?
So there's a lot to unpack there. I believe the question started about New York Times, and we got to hear the congressman disparage the New York Times. Sounds kind of familiar with what we're hearing a little bit too much right now from our leaders. I will say that I am proud to be endorsed by the New York Times and the Times Union, for that matter, who I believe endorsed you 2 years ago and thought differently this time around, I think for good reason. In terms of a number of the accusations laid down just there, one, I want to reiterate, and this is part of why people are so tired of politics. I made my position clear on Israel. It is a democracy. It is a Jewish democracy. I mean, maybe the congressmen know this, but my wife is Jewish. My children are Jewish. We actually go to synagogue. She's been to Israel 4 times, you know, for work with the State Department around her film. She actually does work in the cultural diversity space for the culture. We are of the culture. So when you start just throwing words around for political expediency, it's quite revealing. I also will note that when you say that I'm for a single-payer system, when I've repeatedly said otherwise, are you really trying to have a debate with me, the individual who is just a few feet away from you, or just some made-up individual who you feel like you have a better chance of beating? I don't understand. We could have a real debate about the issues, talk about what matters for healthcare, and I'm happy to have that conversation. But at every turn, you keep trying to create another person to debate against. Just debate me. I'm right here.
Next question. Congressman, everyone has seen the ad with you hugging Andrea Mitchell. the mother of 2 with a brain tumor. You promised not to take her health insurance, but you did vote to advance the American Health Care Act, a Republican repeal and replace health care bill that could have removed protections for people with pre-existing medical conditions. So my question is, did you break your promise by voting for the Republican replacement bill?
No, I didn't break my promise in the least. And the fact is, this is personal to me and my wife. My wife had a serious operation for cancer when she was 39 years old, had a long recovery and follow-up treatments. We fully understand the need to protect people with pre-existing conditions. The legislation I voted for would have done just that. The example that is used of the young woman who was in a rally on my front lawn back in January of 2017 is interesting also, because she, for instance, is on Medicaid, where even if you do not believe that our legislation protected people with pre-existing conditions, if you're on Medicaid, this issue, your health status, does not matter. Your only qualification is your income, not your health status. Now, the argument is that the so-called MacArthur Amendment in the bill that I voted for, which was not part of the legislation when it was the so-called deciding vote coming out of the Budget Committee. That's complete falsehood, and your headline was actually false in that regard. The MacArthur Amendment was added late in the process. This would affect potentially 7% of people in the individual insurance market, not Medicare, Medicaid, not the employer-provided or union-provided health care, but only the individual insurance market if someone did not maintain continuous coverage. But because of my knowledge of New York law, I also knew that that amendment and that limited state waiver process would not have applied in New York State. So the argument from my friend over here is that somehow I went back on my promise because of the MacArthur Amendment. And the fact is, the MacArthur Amendment wouldn't have applied in New York State, and frankly, I doubt very many governors would have sought the limited state waiver anyway. So the argument about pre-existing conditions, I fully favor protections for people with pre-existing conditions, and I've now supported a bipartisan approach to try to rectify the problems with the ACA. Premiums and deductibles are way too high. If you have an $8,000 deductible under the ACA, it's unaffordable for most people.
Thank you. Mr. Delgado?
Yeah, that just wasn't an honest answer. The congressman has repeatedly said, he just literally said with Benita Zahn, when she asked him about this very ad and the promise he made, he said, I voted to protect pre-existing conditions for everyone. Those were his words, everyone. And then he just sits up here and tells us that he didn't. That in effect, there are some group of people out there that would not have these protections. So which one is it? Either you voted to protect, guarantee protections for everyone, or you didn't. And you just have to own up to that fact. The same way you have to own up to the fact that a woman came in front of you, in front of your home with a spinal condition and a brain tumor, who said, please, do not take away my health care, and you felt it was okay to promise her 3 times, I promise, I promise, I promise, and hug her. And the bill you voted for would have rolled back Medicaid expansion and put in a precarious state Medicaid enrollment, which would have affected whether or not she would have been able to stay on enrollment. And you put her at risk. And that was a promise that was, in fact, broken.
No. Congressman?
Well, the gentleman just simply, maybe it's because he just arrived, but he doesn't understand New York law. I promised my constituents that nothing I would vote for would affect their ability to secure health coverage for the pre-existing condition, and that's exactly what I did. The gentleman also has attacked me for a so-called age tax, which also has been debunked thoroughly, doesn't even apply in New York State, and because of state law, and I understand that. So these false attacks continue, and look, when Nancy Pelosi is desperate to become Speaker, and Nancy Pelosi is desperate to become Speaker, and so that's why they are pouring over $10 million into this district in negative ads against me, which falsely represent my position. As I've said, our legislation would have protected everyone in our district, in our state, with a pre-existing condition, and I doubt that the limited state waivers would have been applied for. And even if they would have in those states, there were provisions added to the legislation which would have meant that no one with a pre-existing condition would have paid more for their health care. So the gentleman just doesn't understand it. And unfortunately, he, because of his ambition, he's so anxious to be elected that he'll say anything to get elected.
I just want to make sure that everybody understands and that they heard all of the qualifiers now that we're hearing in his answer that were not there previously. Living in the state, have to be here to, I assume that other folks won't waive it. None of these qualifiers were in the original answer. In the original answer, it's an absolute definitive, my vote would not have gutted pre-existing conditions for anybody. You say that kind of statement, you better stand by it.
Okay. We're going to, next question, Ken.
Yeah.
I do want to expand on that particular issue, however. You talked about your wife and her pre-existing condition. I have 2 children who live out of state. So when you say that you were securing the right for everyone in New York, some of us who have relatives in other states do worry about what could happen there. So is that really an adequate answer for those of us who may be mobile ourselves or have children and other relatives who are?
Ken, it is, because the way in which the final legislation was constructed, anyone that would have been in a situation where they did not maintain continuous coverage in the individual health insurance market, which is 7% of insureds, if you did not maintain continuous coverage and then you reapplied for insurance and you happen to live in a state where a governor applied for a limited state waiver, which HHS approved, there were provisions added to the legislation which would have protected anyone from a rising premium because of their pre-existing condition. So it would not have affected anyone's ability to get coverage, and it would not have cost anyone in that limited circumstance any more money. So therefore, everyone was protected. And certainly everyone in New York State was protected without any shred of a doubt. If you were in a state where there was a limited state waiver, we put protections in so that it wouldn't cost that person any more premium in order to secure coverage.
Then why did the Washington Post today list you among 7 Republicans who are, quote, misleading voters on this issue, and specifically pointed out the difference between access to health care and the ability to afford health care?
Because the Washington Post, like Mr. Delgado, doesn't understand New York law. And it's very simple. It is a very simple answer. They simply do not understand New York law. The gentleman, for instance, attacked me for supporting a so-called age tax. The age tax, if you wanted to call it that, is really a 3-to-1 ratio in a community rating situation in the individual insurance market. And in the individual insurance market, the age tax doesn't apply in New York State. So they've repeatedly said this, and their campaign has had to retract what they said because they recognize that it doesn't apply in New York State. So these are the kind of misrepresentations when someone is so overwhelmingly preening in their ambition to achieve office. This is what you get. That is the consequence when someone parachutes in, having no connection to this district, no connection to the people in this district, and he basically says he will say or do anything that Mrs. Pelosi dictates in order to become a member of Congress. And that is the reality that we face.
Mr. Delgado?
Yes. So I just want to be clear about something. The congressman talks about the age tax. It's the same principle. The fact of the matter is, the bill that he voted for allows insurance companies, instead of charging 3-to-1 to seniors, charge 5-to-1. And as I've acknowledged, again, I deal in facts. I don't make any of this stuff up.
You just made that up. It's not seniors, for instance. It is not seniors. Seniors are people 65 years of age and older. And we are talking about an entirely different category of people. We're talking about people that might be affected by the community rating policy, but it is not seniors.
Okay,
the gentleman doesn't seem to understand that.
Mr. Delgado, Mr. Delgado, would you like to, excuse me. Let's let them answer. Mr. Delgado?
Yes. As I was saying, the fact is, in New York, there's community pricing, community pairing. You don't have to have, or you can't allow insurance companies to charge different rates based on age. That bill was passed in 1992, I believe. And I believe the congressman was in the assembly at that time. It was a bipartisan bill. 25 folks did not vote for that pricing that now the congressman seems very eager to rely on to make his point. You know who one of those 25 members were? John Faso. So the individual who's now saying that, oh, we in New York don't have that effect, well, it's not because of you. And in fact, when it comes back to, and when you go back to beyond the state borders, once again, as pointed out by Ken, folks have individuals across the country here that we're caring about. Parents, grandparents who might want to figure out how they're going to be charged by this. We're Americans. You don't sit anymore in the state assembly. You have to be thoughtful about the role of where you sit and how it impacts everybody across the country. If you want to keep having that sort of myopic point of view, then just stay in the state assembly. It is a federal seat that implicates everybody's lives across this country. So when you start conflating these things, it's a problem. And just be honest. Just be honest with the record. That's all we should deserve, is just be honest with the facts.
Congressman?
I'm sorry that the gentleman doesn't understand New York law. And here's how you have to look at it. You have to look at it from the standpoint when New York went to a pure community rating state, meaning you couldn't charge a 60-year-old more than you could charge a 25-year-old for health insurance in the individual insurance market. Again, this is 7% of the market. When New York did that, there were 750,000 people in the individual insurance market in New York State. Within a decade later, there were fewer than 30,000 people in the individual insurance market. And the reason I opposed that back in 1992 is I feared precisely would happen what did happen, which is New York State destroyed its individual insurance market. Again, we're talking about people who are under the Medicare age, not seniors, and we're talking about what happened is the 25-year-olds were priced out of the market because 25-year-olds don't use anywhere near the health care that a 60-year-old does. And when New York said you couldn't use age as any factor whatsoever, it destroyed the individual market.
Okay, we're going to go to the next question.
We're going to move on to another topic, immigration. For both of you, what can Congress do about A, illegal immigration, B, young people, the dreamers, brought into this country by their parents, and C, creating a path to citizenship? Why don't you go first?
Yeah, we certainly have to fix our broken immigration system. We have millions of undocumented immigrants here in the country, and it is imperative that we work in a bipartisan way, I would add, towards bringing folks out of the shadows in a humane and compassionate manner. I will say, big picture-wise, we are living in a time where the climate is not conducive to that because of the rhetoric that we are hearing all too often, rhetoric that is based in xenophobia. When you talk about, Mexicans being criminals and rapists, I mean, that does not set the right tone to have a thoughtful conversation on this issue. We are a nation of laws, and we need to make sure those laws are abided by. No question about it. And if you've been here and you've committed a crime illegally or you've done violence in particular, you shouldn't be able to just get in line. Shouldn't be here. There's no question about that. But at the end of the day, there are vastly more individuals here who are voluntarily paying taxes, who work and have been working here for decades, who are raising their families here. And we have an obligation, consistent with our principles as this country, to make sure that they too can pursue the dream like anybody else. And particularly those folks who have been here since they were children. And that's why I would, in the first instance, argue for a Clean Dream Act without any strings attached. That should just happen in and of itself. And then tied to the legal residency component and work requirement component, or work piece component, we've got to bolster up the H-2A program, particularly for seasonal labor, folks who work on fruit and vegetable farms. I hear from too many folks in the agricultural community house becoming too regulatory for them to actually trust the situation. In the same vein, we have an economic imperative to make sure that folks can work here legally on an annual basis for our dairy farmers. So it's not just the moral imperative to fix this problem, but also an economic one for the farming community all across this district. And again, it is important that we have this conversation in a way that doesn't feed into hate and nastiness, but more so feeds into our shared values as a country that's always welcomed folks with open arms and done so in a way that is consistent with the fact that we are a nation of laws.
All right. Congressman?
So my position on this, I've co-sponsored bipartisan legislation to fix the agricultural labor situation. It's vitally important that we do that. Every farmer I talk to throughout our district will talk about the need for a system of agricultural labor administered by the Department of Agriculture, not the Department of Labor, and that would allow them to have a steady stream of workers to come in and out of the country for agricultural work and seasonal work, such as in the horticulture industry. The overall issue on immigration, we have to control our borders. We're a nation of laws. We're also a nation of immigrants, and we have to respect the law. And I support better security on the border, but at the same time I've supported legislation and voted for legislation that would completely fix the issue on the DACA population, not just the 800,000 that signed up for President Obama's order, but the 1.8 million people who would be in that category. It's critical that we do this, and I do think that there's a middle consensus in the Congress of Republicans and Democrats who would be willing to vote for it. The fringes, the extremes in both parties, frankly, aren't willing to do it.
Okay.
Just one quick follow-up. A lot of people talk about better security at the border. How would each of you define the better security that we need?
Well, in some places we need a physical barrier. Where we have one now, it needs to be either expanded or improved. Those physical barriers exist in certain places, and the border security and the border patrol people will tell you that there are places where they absolutely need a barrier. But we can also use technology, because many places along the U.S.-Mexico border are not suitable for building a wall, for instance. And that would not be effective or cost effective. So we have to use technology. We also have to better increase the number of administrative judges that can process immigration and asylum cases more quickly, more speedily. I said right from the start, when the separation of children at the border from their parents was undertaken, I said I opposed that. I thought it was morally wrong. But at the same time, we have to recognize this issue has vexed American administrations, not just the Trump administration, but the Obama administration and the Bush administration, back for 30 years. And there are still thousands of unaccompanied minors showing up at the border that we have to deal with. And one of the keys here is to create a system of legal immigration where people can come and work in the country, but not create an amnesty-type situation where those folks are getting in line ahead of people that have gone through the process and followed the law and followed it the appropriate way. So I do think, again, there could be a consensus on this. To say we want a clean DREAM Act, that's fine, but that's not going to get signed into law. This administration is going to want to have border security attached to a fix on DACA. And I think that's something that's political reality we have to recognize. You can't pass just a clean DACA bill and have it signed into law. It wouldn't pass in the Senate either, in my view. So we have to do these things contemporaneously. And again, we've got to fix the agricultural labor system. The issue that most employers talk to me about in this district, regardless of whether they're in agriculture, they have jobs. They can't find qualified people to fill the jobs. And this is important in agriculture, but in every other industry, including tourism.
Mr. Delgado?
Yes, I don't take the position that we need to build any physical barriers. I think, technology where suitable could be appropriate. But I think notes, putting more funding into administrative judges to process and have folks on the borders there doing the work. To me, that would be the appropriate place to prioritize our resources and our funding. I think that is how we can really begin the process and deal with the fact that we do have a broken system. But again, beyond just the technical realities of how to fix the system itself, we're not going to be able to get there unless we, again, take ugly things about entire and we need to have that consistent estimation speak clearly enough on the issue of family separation until after President Trump issued his executive order ending the policy. Simply saying that the president was sort of kind of in the right while making the point that it wasn't ideal, to me, is not sufficient when we're talking about children being separated from their parents. Okay. In that moment, we need clear, unequivocal leadership, and then we can talk about how to fix the problem thereafter.
Congressman, just 1 second.
Nope.
Well, again, the gentleman rewrites history. He is conversant with changing his view on what words mean. And at this time, I said, for instance, in Charlottesville, I said the president's response was entirely inadequate with Charlottesville. I said that the separation of children from their parents at the border was entirely inappropriate. And so that's my position, and no amount of twisting and turning here can change that.
Let's move to the Farm Bill, which obviously deals with agriculture, but also specifically the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Mr. Delgado, let me start with you. The Farm Bill, as written, was going to cut the SNAP program and require more work requirements for people. How would you approach that?
Yes, and I want to talk about the Farm Bill in a lot of different ways, if I may, because to me, this is an example where we're not the folks we are sending to Congress aren't representing their constituents. There are no mega farmers in this district. In fact, only 5% of farmers across the country are corporate farms. And yet the vast majority of all the subsidies in that farm bill go to corporate and mega farms or commodity-based farms. There was no work properly done to diversify the crop insurance program to help small and mid-tier farmers that grow vegetables or fruits. It actually defunds programs that many of the small and mid-tier farmers in this community rely on, like the Food Promotion Program or the Farmers Market Program or the Cost Organic Certification Program. And ultimately, at every turn, it undermines or makes it easier for mega farmers and corporate farmers to continue to feed themselves on the supplements and subsidies that our government is giving them. Now, why you would vote for that bill while sitting on the Ag Committee serving this community that is filled with small and mid-tier farmers, I don't know. But the congressman did vote for that bill. On the SNAP piece, I don't get it. 80% of folks in this country are sharing 10% of their wealth. 80,000 folks in this district are facing hunger. 1 in 3 kids in the county right now is growing up in poverty. 1 in 3. And in the midst of the fact that we have tremendous wealth and prosperity in this country, we figure it's okay to make it harder for folks to get access to food. Increase the age from 49 to 59 and increase the work requirements from 20 to 25. And on what basis? I don't understand the basis, particularly when you figure that the fraud component that oftentimes is cited is not there. It is one of the best quality control measures for any benefit in this country. Less than 1% or so. So I don't understand the basis for it when we have all this prosperity and growth, and at the same time we're adding $1.5 trillion to our deficit via a tax bill, and then they want to turn around and also gut Medicaid and Medicare. They're gnawing at the bone for no reason, and it is cruel.
All right. Congressman?
Ken, your question had a premise in it that is incorrect. The Farm Bill and the SNAP provisions did not cut the SNAP program. What we did in the SNAP program, there's an assumption that the CBO made in their analysis, which said that because of an improving economy, there'll be more than 1 million people who will no longer be receiving food stamps because they are rising income, they get jobs, etc. This is a time in America where there are more open jobs than there are unemployed people. Yet there are about 4 to 5 million people receiving SNAP between 18 and 59 who are able-bodied, without little children at home, who are not in a work program and who are not in a training program and who are not working. And so the best way to uplift families and to uplift their economic status is to have a job. And so we're talking about training programs. And this is, I think, not cruel. This is logical. Most taxpayers expect that if you're able-bodied and you can work, you should be working or getting in a training program if you're relying on taxpayer assistance. And on the Farm Bill itself, every farm organization in this state and in this district supported the legislation that I voted for.
Okay. Congressman, when you were in the New York State Assembly, you called Roe v. Wade a black mark on this country. You also said the Supreme Court decision to legalize abortion was unconstitutional. If overturned, are there any federal abortion regulations that you would support?
Well, I believe that I am pro-life, but I also believe in exceptions. Rape, incest, life of the mother. I voted for a bill that would have created a 20-week or 5-month time period, and I think that's a reasonable thing. I recognize that good people of good faith are going to disagree on this topic, but I do believe that it is very important that we provide alternatives to abortion for people, and we also provide significant incentives for people to be able to find out about those alternatives. And I think that's an important thing to do.
Mr. Delgado?
Yes, I mean, listen, I am pro-choice, and I believe that we should not legislate a woman's body. It's a choice that a woman it's a choice. It is a moral choice, and it is a choice between a woman and her God. And the government should not be interfering with that choice, particularly when we're talking about how carrying a life impacts not just that woman's person, but also her life choices. You know, men can't always understand this because we don't carry children. But the point of the fact is, when you go to school, what kind of job you can pursue, all these things are implicated by the fact that you have to carry a child for 9 months. And so thinking about that is critically important. When you also vote to defund Planned Parenthood, it doesn't help the situation from my vantage point. And when you vote for a 20-week abortion ban, I don't find that helpful either. We do have a law in the books. It is called Roe v. Wade. It sets the parameters, and we can act appropriately from there.
Well, I mean, I just have to say, I'm shocked that he thinks that a limitation of 5 months of pregnancy is unreasonable. I mean, a 5-month-old unborn child is a person that is, if they are born prematurely, is capable of surviving. And to simply say that a 5-month limitation is unreasonable, I think most people would say that that is not unreasonable. But again, people of good faith are going to disagree on this topic. It's a matter of deeply held moral belief, and that's not going to change. We're not going to change anyone's opinion on that. But I think it's truly radical to say that a 5-month-old unborn child doesn't deserve the protection of the law. I think that's a reasonable protection.
The law has been clear on this. We have a law in the books, Roe v. Wade. It's been clear. And New York has a law on the books.
That is not on the books anywhere.
And 20-week ban is what you voted for.
Next
20-week ban
next question.
Exception.
Ken?
Yeah, we're in the lightning round here. The Dow Jones Industrial Average has dropped 245 points today. The analysts are saying it's concerns over more tariffs. Are we heading in the wrong direction with more tariffs on China?
Well, I have said from the start that I'm concerned about the effect of not going strictly after the Chinese theft of intellectual property, which is an ongoing problem, and the Chinese failure to obey the WTO agreements that they signed. And they have disadvantaged American businesses with unreasonable requirements that violate the WTO that they signed. I'm glad that the administration, and so the tariff issue is one that potentially could be harmful to the economy if a trade war were to persist for a long period of time. I'm very happy that the administration was able to negotiate a good tariff deal with Canada. They've been notoriously reluctant, and they've been discriminatory against New York farmers. I've met with Tom Bowes and the Deals and Delaware County dairy farms, for instance. This is a big issue here and across our district because New York dairy farmers were adversely affected by the discriminatory tariffs on Class 7 milk that the Canadians put on our product. It distinctly hurt New York dairy farmers. And so I've been fighting to improve the situation. We've improved the margin protection program for dairy farmers, nowhere near enough, but we've improved it. We've also, in fact, I met with 7 farmers with Supervisor Tom Bowes of Callicoon a few months ago to discuss the issues of potentially these independents being forced out by the processor not being willing to take their milk. And I'm fighting to also get whole milk back into the school lunch program, which is thoroughly unreasonable that it is not included in our school lunch program. So there are a number of things that we can do to help our farmers. Tariffs generally are not going to help our farmers because if they're the apple growers or the dairy farmers, they are generally adversely affected by tariffs. So trade wars are not easy to win. And trade wars, I hope we will not engage in it, but we do have to fight the Chinese on their theft of intellectual property.
Mr. Delgado?
Yes, the tariffs. The tariffs are not good. They are high taxes in effect. They get passed down to the cost of doing business and ultimately to the consumer. So they're taxes. And you know, there's no doubt that China, whether it's currency manipulation, stealing our IP, dumping steel, you know, these are behavior that shouldn't be tolerated. And it is important that we take a stand. But how we take that stand, I think, is just as important. Bringing the world order to bear is critically important. And when you just go for a tit for tat and unilaterally make decisions, you end up having to bail out or rescue, I should say, you know, our farmers as a result of that with taxpayer money. In the same vein, though, I can also acknowledge that the outcome of the new NAFTA agreement does benefit our farmers here at home. Do I agree with the process that was undertaken by the president? No. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that something was done and it did benefit our farmers here. I would hope, though, that moving forward, that how we go about engaging in these trade agreements is more thoughtful and more responsible.
Congress voted to cut taxes drastically last year. Congressman, you were against that tax bill, I recall.
That's correct.
And Mr. Delgado, I assume you would agree with that vote. I'm trying to get you two together here.
It's not going to happen on this issue.
What has the effect of the tax cut been in the 19th District, and what can be done to help the people who might not have gotten much help from that tax cut?
Well, the sole reason that I did not support it was the limitation on very short notice, basically 2.5 weeks, of the state and local tax deduction. That limitation of $10,000 doesn't affect most taxpayers in our district. In fact, only 31% of taxpayers in this district itemize their deductions prior to the tax bill. And after the tax bill, as of 2018, approximately 8% will itemize their deductions. But I felt that it was wrong for our state to limit the state and local tax deduction to $10,000. So many of the provisions in the tax bill, however, are beneficial. For instance, the average tax-paying household in this district doubling the standard deduction to $24,000. The average household will receive a savings of about $1,500 in this district. Small businesses, the 20% pass-through deduction for subchapter S corporations, that's a very significant benefit. The immediate expensing and writing off of investment in plant and equipment and machinery, many businesses in this district have told me that is beneficial. So I think it's important to note that the combination of tax changes and regulatory changes have gotten the economy going, where we're growing it at or near 4%. And I think that's critical, because if we're going to meet our obligations in the future, we have to have higher economic growth. If we're going to meet our obligations to young people looking for opportunity in our economy, higher economic growth is the way to achieve it. So I think, on balance, I still want to try to change the limitation on the SALT deduction. I will, if reelected, continue my efforts to do so. But I think it's important also to recognize that our economy is moving, and we've got to get the upstate economy moving. That's why I've supported things like ending the Medicaid mandate on county property taxpayers. My proposal, which Mr. Delgado opposes, would save the average taxpayer between $350 and $550 a year. And I've also supported ending New York's notorious scaffold law on federally funded projects, and that would save us a lot of money upstate.
Mr. Delgado?
So it is a little confusing to follow if the congressman is for or against the bill. You know, he notes that it's the only issue he has is the SALT cap. And if you follow the voting process here, he voted no because of the SALT cap, as he just said, but then voted yes to advance the bill to reconciliation with the Senate version. And both versions had the SALT cap in it. And by rules, you can't negotiate that now. That's locked into the bill. So I'm not sure why, if you say no the first time in the House version, you would vote yes to advance the bill the second time. It doesn't make any sense unless you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. Now, on the question of saying that the cap was the only problem, well, you know what I have a big problem with is a $1.5 trillion deficit that it added. That's what I have a real problem with, particularly when it bankrupts our ability to invest in education and infrastructure and the things that we need to revitalize upstate New York and all across this country. And particularly when that $1.5 trillion deficit is used as justification for gutting programs like Medicare, for gutting programs like Medicaid. $1.5 trillion. He just voted to gut in the most recent budget resolution for Medicaid. $500 billion from Medicare. You just voted for from a budget resolution, and it was all to pay for the tax bill.
I'm going to try to follow up on that question. There are many people in the 19th District who have not reaped financial benefits, working 2, 3 jobs. The trickle-down has not worked for them. What's your plan for helping the people who have been left behind?
Yes.
Mr. Delgado?
Thank you. Because that's the question we've got to answer. And the thing that, listen, there are some good things, as the Congressman noted. You get a bump in your check. That's a good thing no matter what the amount is, because times are tough. The small business owners, they get a benefit. That's great. We make sure we increase the standard deduction. That's great. But it always comes with strings attached. And that's the thing that I have a problem with. The strings are attached to big, massive, grossly disproportionate giveaways to big corporations and a wealthy few. There's no need for that. There's no need to have those strings attached to that. I think we could do a lot better by just providing real, meaningful tax breaks without strings attached to working and middle-class families. Really put money back in the pocket. And I think the only reason why the strings are always attached, and this is a problem with our system, is because the folks who are paying for access make sure that there are strings attached. And when you have corporate PACs and when you have Citizens United, you have unlimited amounts of money that can pour into our system and in effect buy politicians, and so ultimately we don't get government for the people and by the people. We've got to get back to a point where we can pass legislation that truly benefits the vast majority of everyday Americans and does not disproportionately inure to the benefit of a wealthy and powerful few.
Well,
Congressman, how do we help the people left behind?
Well, one of the things that is in that tax bill that helps the average working family is doubling the child tax credit. That was in that legislation. One of the things that would help people is if we ended the Medicaid mandate on local property taxpayers. That's something that I've been pushing for and is very important. My opponent opposes it. This would be a meaningful thing. For 51 years, New York has been shifting part of its Medicaid costs onto local homeowners. The amount that our local homeowners in New York State pay in Medicaid costs is the equivalent of what local homeowners pay in the 49 other states combined. This is totally out of whack. And so the gentleman talks about corporations. Well, the United States of America had a 35% corporate tax rate. By eliminating the double taxation on foreign-earned profits for companies like Apple, for instance, they brought back $238 billion worth of foreign-earned profits, are paying $38 billion in taxes we wouldn't otherwise have received, and they're going to create 20,000 American jobs over the next 5 years.
But the tax breaks for companies were permanent, and the tax breaks for individuals were temporary.
Yeah, and I think so. I think the answer to that is to make the tax breaks for individuals permanent. They would expire in 2026 or 2027. I would support making them permanent, but I'd like to also, at the same time, raise that threshold on the SALT deduction. And so I think that's the kind of deal that I would support to make those permanent. I do think it's important that we have permanence and predictability in the tax code. And that's one of the things why if you talk to small businesses, being able to write off the investment they have in a plant and equipment is extraordinarily important. That means they can buy a piece of machinery to become more productive, to make more money, to hire more workers. That's how the economy is supposed to work. But a 35% tax rate for corporations, that was the highest corporate tax rate among the industrial nations. So we were non-competitive in that regard, and that's why it was important to reduce that.
Mr. Delgado, any comment on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's important. This is where we're legislators, right? You can write what you want into the law, the intent of the law. So I can acknowledge that the 35% rate might be high, and we could try to figure out how to deal with that. But when you just say, blank check, do whatever you want with it, and hope that it trickles down to everybody else, and we know it never does, that's a problem. They don't invest in the wage growth. 0.07, that's the wage growth right now. Healthcare costs are going up, transportation costs are going up, food's going up, wages have remained stagnant. Real jobs that pay good wages, they're not there. And typically happens that every time we give these kind of breaks is that the money, the profits, are used to buy back shares. That's it. And to fatten the pockets of those who don't need. This happens time and time again. You know, and when you have literally 80% of the benefits of that bill going to the top 1% by 2026, that's a problem, right? And so we've got to get to a point where we don't tie the little benefits that folks get, everyday Americans and small business owners get, which are good benefits, and we need to expand those benefits to just massive giveaways to folks who don't need.
Okay, we're going to go to closing statements. First is Mr. Delgado.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank each and every one of you for coming out. Congressman, always good to be with you as well. You know, listen, at the end of the day, no, and I say that genuinely, you know, because we've got to get to a point in this country where we can have a healthy debate and not make it personal. You know, I don't hold any ill will towards the congressman. And that's not why I'm running. You know, I'm running to serve everybody in this room. Democrat, Republican, independent, moderate, it doesn't matter. We're Americans. And so it's important that we bear down now more than ever, particularly in this climate of divisiveness, particularly in this climate of ugliness, where we see violence percolating to a degree that we simply cannot tolerate, that we lean into our shared values and our principles as Americans, that we remember who we fundamentally are as Americans, that we are about the business of opportunity for everyone, and that this is a democracy. And to be a democracy, our government must be for the people and by the people. It cannot be beholden to outside interests or special interests. We need folks who actually care about individuals, folks who want to do the work every day. And that's what I've been doing now for over a year and a half. I've been to all 11 counties. I've done town halls in every single one of them. I'm engaging, I'm listening to everything that I can. And I promise you this, I intend, should I be lucky enough to win and fortunate enough to win, to take you with me to D.C., not leave you behind, to bring the people with me to D.C., to serve you respectfully, honestly, decently, not to lie to you, not to hide from you, but to always be accountable to you. And yes, we may not agree on every issue. That might not happen, but you will always know that I'm straight with you. You will always know that I'm accountable just to you, the people. We have got to restore that faith in our democracy again, and that is what I hope to be able to do with you and your support on November 6th. Thank you.
Okay. Congressman Faso.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Times Herald Record and my opponent for participating in this debate, and all of you here tonight and all of you watching at home. The fact is, I have worked in a bipartisan way, ranking 18th out of 435 as members of Congress. I've also worked on local issues here in Sullivan County, whether it's the Upper Delaware Coalition, securing the funding necessary to keep that organization alive that helps protect our watershed and our tourism industry, or whether it's working with Tom Bowes and dairy farmers to try to address the dairy issues that are affected, or the Catskill Regional Medical Center, which waited for 5 years to get funding for an emergency generator, which was almost, their existing generator had almost been destroyed during Sandy. I got that funding, $1.75 million. We just recognized the opening of that generator and the availability of that generator and its installation last week at the Catskill Regional Medical Center. We have worked hard to recognize the local issues that we are dealing with here for veterans, for instance. I've held veterans fairs throughout the district and here in Sullivan County, worked closely with the Veteran Service Officer John Crotty here in Sullivan County to address the issues and the needs of our veterans. So these are the issues, the bread and butter issues that I as a member of Congress have done to address the issues that people in Sullivan County are facing. But we also have the issues, health care. I've got a bipartisan plan with the Problem Solvers Caucus in Congress to address the issues of rising premiums and deductibles. We're working hard to bring about the end of this Medicaid mandate, which is $350 to $550 for every homeowner and small business here in this county, and working to make New York State and make this district a better place for children to stay, for young people to work, and for seniors to be able to enjoy their golden years in their retirement. That's what I'm doing. That's what I have done, working in a bipartisan way in the Congress, and I've been very honored to serve for the last 2 years, and I hope to have your support on Election Day, November 6th. Thank you.
I want to thank Congressman John Faso and Mr. Antonio Delgado for agreeing to participate, as well as thank the staff of SUNY Sullivan for allowing us to use their facility, and also Times Herald Record opinion page contributor Ken Hall and the Orange County Citizens Foundation for co-sponsoring tonight's debate. Once again, tomorrow night we will be at the Great Room in Newburgh at SUNY Orange in Newburgh for a debate between Sean Patrick Maloney and Jimmy O'Donnell. We welcome you to attend these debates, or you can watch them streaming live anytime at recordonline.com.